I tried 26 fantasy series in 2024, and these are the ones I think are worth reading. So for the past year, I have either started, continued, or finished, or dipped my toes in 26 different series. And today I just want to give you a brief overview of which series I enjoyed, which I'm going to continue, and not and so on. And this is in no particular order. So first up, I started Fallen God series by Hannah Kaner. So I've only read the first book called God Killer. It's a very short novel, and while I enjoyed the idea of the novel, it didn't leave any emotional impact on me, which is a shame because this novel is like, I think it's less than 300 pages, and the fact that such a short book didn't really make any emotional impact on me was just a bit of a shame. Because I love the cover. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to be continuing this one. The next series is the Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. So I actually finished this trilogy this year, and I had a wonderful time with this one. I'm really glad I finally read it, because I feel like steampunk settings are such an underutilized setting in fantasy. If you enjoy fast-paced fantasy with lots of actions, and a fantasy where guns and gunpowder is a big thing, then you should definitely check out this one. I will say that the first and second book were my favorite, while the last book in the series was good. It was just extremely fast-paced, and so much happened. So unfortunately, the last book was my least favorite, but nonetheless, I'm really glad I read this one, and I'm definitely intrigued to pick up the sequel trilogy potentially next year. We'll see what happens. The third series is the Stormlight Archive. So I read Oathbringer this year, and then also read the short novella called Eighth Chant. If you watch my channel, then you know that I'm in a bit of a Brandon Sanderson reading slump at the moment. Now, I love the man. As you can see behind me, I've spent a lot of money on that man. He is also one of the reasons why I fell in love with fantasy. But for around 4 to 5 years, I read a Sanderson novel every 2 to 3 months, and I think simply that I've just hit some fatigue. And I've just read too much. So Oathbringer was fantastic, and I can definitely envision myself to read at least one Sanderson novel next year. So overall, really glad I read Oathbringer, but unfortunately I'm a bit of in a Sanderson slump at the moment. But yeah, hopefully next year I'll actually be excited about him again. The next one is the Bone Saga. So I read the short novella called Jade's Shards, which is actually a short story collection. Yeah, it's 4 really short stories. Absolutely love this collection. Fonda Lee is just incredible. I love everything she writes, both her thick, chunky books and also her short stories, and that universe is one of my favorite universes. So yeah, really glad I read this one. Next one is Paladins of the Harvest by Kate and Love. So the first book is called An Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard. Yeah, that author, he loves having crazy titles. So this is a self-published debut novel, and I picked it up not really knowing anything. What I'll say, if you enjoy political fantasy or dystopian fantasy, because the setting of this series is literally a future where people harvest newborn babies for their body parts to gain magical abilities. It is crazy dark. Then you'll probably enjoy this one. I will say that the writing is very unique, so it definitely took me quite a while to get into it, and there are some info dumps, so I don't think it's the easiest novel to recommend, but it's definitely one of the most unique ones I read, and I can definitely envision myself actually picking up book 2 in next year. Next up, we have the Eighth Chant series by Christopher Warman and Ellen March. So this is technically a series because the first book is like an anthology kind of book, but then they've also written a full-length novel in the same universe. Now, Season of Albaddon, the book I read, is probably my favorite self-published book I read this year. As I said, it is an anthology, so it's 4 different stories, but all 4 stories, they kinda overlap, and it's just so clever. So if you're looking for a like a scary fairy tale kind of story, then this is genuinely one of the best ones I've ever come across. Such a huge surprise, and I hope more of you will actually check it out because it is just brilliant. Okay, next up we have 3 different series by Rob J. Hayes, so I'll go quite quickly through these 2. So I read the novella in Archive of the God Eater and the Annals of the God Eater, so technically these are in the same universe, but they are 2 different series, and I read the first novella in both of these, and both of them were 5 out of 5 stars. They're very bleak and dark, but Rob J. Hayes is just such a talented author, and I can't wait to read Herald next year, and probably also check out some of his other work. I did also try the Mortal Techniques, so the first book is called Never Die, also by Rob J. Hayes. Unfortunately, while I did have fun with this novel, it didn't really leave a huge emotional impact on me, but it is a great standalone, so if you're looking for a palate cleanser, I would still recommend it. But yeah, definitely Deathless and Demon, which are way shorter as well, were so much better than Never Die. Next up, we have the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. So I've only read the first book, Hyperion, and that became the book of the year for me. It left such a huge impression on me. I was just mind blown. Very similar to Season of Albaddon. It is written in a kind of anthology kind of way where you have 6 or is it 7 different stories that all link together. I'm just so impressed by Dan Simmons. The writing style differs from each story. The characters are so unique, and it is just a mind-blowing story. Now, if you are usually put off by sci-fi and stuff like that, please check out this novel. I am usually not a huge fan of sci-fi, but this is the most character-driven fantasy novel I've ever read. It was just beautiful. a perfect amount of intrigue and answers, and yeah, it's just an experience. Please read it. And then next up, I just put Cosmere. I read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which is a standalone in the Cosmere universe. Really enjoyed this one, and it's arguably now my favorite Cosmere standalone novel. And I Will Die on the Hill, I think you can actually also start with this one. Yes, there might be some Easter eggs that you don't really understand, but they are so tiny and the plot is just interesting and riveting. And my wife also read it and also really enjoyed it. Definitely would recommend Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Then I also read Empire of Black and Gold, which is the first book in the Shadow of the Apt series by Adam Tchaikovsky. It is the first novel in a 10-book epic fantasy series, and I read this book like 6 to 8 months ago, and I really enjoyed it, and I really want to continue the series next year. I've just had so much other stuff that I've been prioritizing over the series, but I was super impressed by the introduction to this massive world. It is actually a futuristic fantasy setting, which again, you don't see it that often. There's literally like helicopters, modern technology, but then there's also a lot of like interesting magic system tied to insects and stuff. It's just crazy. I mean, Adam Tchaikovsky is just a genius. His imagination is just absolutely off the charts. So hopefully I'll be able to actually continue the series next year, but we will see what happens. But yeah, I really enjoyed the first book, and yeah, I own most of them in hardback, so I really need to get back to the series. Then I started The Burning by Evan Winter. The first book is called The Rage of Dragons. The second book is out, which I haven't read yet. Now, I did enjoy Rage of Dragons. A lot of people often compare Evan Winter to John Gwynne because it's very much action, fast-paced, accessible writing style. But this one has an African-inspired setting, which I found really unique. Now, while I did enjoy Rage of Dragons, unfortunately, I really wish that this novel had more than one POV, because I just found the main protagonist to be... He was alright, but his intense focus on revenge and the hatred for what had happened, it just became a bit too repetitive for me. I just didn't really understand how someone could hate someone with such an intensity for such a long time. Obviously, you can bear grudges and hate people for a long time, but just intensity, it just became a bit repetitive. And it also made it for me hard to relate to him as a character, because I just can't relate to having that sense and that kind of hatred to a person. So yeah, I did enjoy it, but unfortunately, I really expected this to become one of my favorite series of all time. And I think I gave the first book 3.5 stars, which again, it's not a bad rating, but it just didn't become a 5 out of 5 star book for me. Then I read Stone of Farewell, which is book 2 in the Memory Sower and Thorn trilogy. And at time of recording this video, I'm 200 pages from finishing this trilogy. I'm recording this early because I'm actually going to traveling in a couple of weeks, so you might be seeing this while I'm in New Zealand. Yes, I'll be going to Hobbiton, but that's not related to this video. Memories of Thorn is now become one of my favorite series of all time. I do find it hard to recommend because Ted Williams, he definitely likes to indulge himself in the characters, and the plot is just way too long. The series is phenomenal. Again, let me reiterate, it is one of my favorite series now, but it didn't need to be this long. I mean, the last book is literally 520,000 words, or around 1,600 pages in the UK. And yes, the conclusion is fantastic, but it is also way too long. But I've often said on this channel that if you like Robin Hobb, classic fantasy, then Ted Williams, you need to check him out because his character work is brilliant. His writing is beautiful, and it definitely has that medieval kind of vibe. Hopefully next year I'll read even more books in the Ocean Saga, because Ted Williams is a wizard. Then I read the whole Rainwell Chronicles by Robin Hobb. So this is the 4th series set in the realm of the Elderlings. I read all 4 books in that quartet, and I am glad I read it because I love Robin Hobb. She's one of my favorite authors of all time. But the Rainwell Chronicles, without a doubt, is the weakest series, and the weakest books I read by her as of now. Especially book 3 and 4, I really struggle to continue because the series feels more YA. There's a lot of like cringy romance, which I was quite surprised by Robin Hobb. And the plot isn't as epic or interesting, and the characters were definitely not as good as like Fitz and some of the characters in The Light Ship Traders. But even a so-called bad book or bad books by the Queen of Fantasy Robin Hobb are not bad books, if that makes any sense. But yeah, definitely my least favorite, but I can't wait to read the Fifth and the Full trilogy, which is the last trilogy in the realms of the Elderlings next year, which will definitely be a goal of mine. Then we have the Last War Trilogy by Mike Shackle. I read this whole trilogy in 2024 as well, and I had a wonderful time. I previously said on my channel that I described the series as kind of like John Gwynne meets Joe Abercrombie, because you have that accessible writing style, the plot is very fast paced, there's a lot of action, but it is way grimmer and bleaker than a lot of the books that John Gwynne writes. So I would really say that if you enjoy John Gwynne's writing, you need to check out Mike Shackle. I found the first book to be a brilliant introduction to a story. I mean, basically, we're set in a story where a kingdom collapses and is overtaken by a foreign power, and then we follow these characters as they try to claim back their homeland. And it gets bloody, it gets grim, and book 2, in my opinion, is the best book in the series. I was really surprised by some of the twists and turns that Mike Shackle took the plot, but it just really worked for me. Now, I don't think that this trilogy will enter my top 10 favorite trilogies of all time, but still, I'll probably give this series as a whole 7 out of 10 stars. Very, very solid, and definitely more people should check it out. Then I read the first book in the Earthsea duology, which I think originally was supposed to be a trilogy, but the first book is called Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Now, this is a so-called futuristic post-apocalyptic novel. It was written in the 90s, and it takes place in 2024, which is really, really bleak. And while I was reading this novel, I felt depressed. It is just, there's almost nothing positive that happens in this novel. So you need to be in the right headspace when you're picking up this novel. So I'll say my overall reading experience of this novel wasn't enjoyable because it was just so bleak. There's no hope. But what I'll say is that this novel has left a lasting impression on me. It's been 6 months since I read it, and I still think about it. And I was just so impressed by how Octavia Butler was able to predict the future. I mean, her future, the 2024, was relatively realistic, which I really appreciate. And a lot of the themes that were analyzed were super interesting about like religion, identity, and capitalism, and so on. So yeah, if you want to read a novel that will make you think about life and stuff like that, then definitely check out this one. But yeah, if you want something jolly fun, stay away from this one. But yeah, really glad I read this one. I haven't really decided yet if I will read the second book or not. Then I read the first book in the Captives War by James S.A. Corey. The first book is called The Mercy of the Gods, and it's a book that came out this year. So this is actually my first James S.A. Corey. Yes, I haven't read any of the Expanse yet. Now, I do believe that this will only be a trilogy, so it's a bit more accessible to get into, and I had a wonderful time with this novel. It's basically set in a setting like 5,000-6,000 years in the future, where humans have left the Earth, they've settled on a new planet, and then they've forgotten where they came from. So humans have been living on a different planet for like 5,000 years, they don't remember Earth or anything, and then an alien race comes to this planet and takes everyone captive and basically slaughters everyone else, and they say, be useful or we'll kill you. And I don't think that's a spoiler because that happens super early in the novel. So yes, I thought the plot was just incredibly captivating. I couldn't stop reading. But yeah, there's definitely some critiques I have as well. For example, the humans on this planet were very, very similar to humans on Earth in 2024, which doesn't really make any sense. But when I read this novel, I had a wonderful time, and I definitely think I'll continue this novel, or series, I mean, next year. Then I read Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I do think you can call this a series because there is a second novel as well. I loved Jurassic Park. I said in my reading vlog that I did enjoy the first half more, where you have a bit more of the exploration of like chaos theory and the process up, because the second half of the novel is just relentless action, people running away from dinosaurs, and that's not a spoiler, right? You've seen Jurassic Park, but it was a great palate cleanser. I did have a great time with this one. I haven't really decided if I will read the second book because most people say the first book is so much better, and while I enjoyed the first book, I don't think I might have enjoyed it enough that I want to read the second book in the series. But yeah, let me know if you think I should read the second book or not. Then I read the first book in the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. So the first book is called A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and yeah, unfortunately this was one of my least favorite novels of the year, but I'm just not a huge fan of a lot of cozy stuff. Now, I do enjoy like Transporter, Legends of Latte, Bookshops and Bone Dust. I love those novels, but there's just something about the writing and the plot here that just didn't work for me. And when I picked up this novel, I quite quickly realized that this wasn't going to work for me. But for some stupid reason, I decided to push myself to read this 400-page book, and the reading experience just became worse and worse and worse. There are times where it is okay to DNF, and this was definitely one of those times, so I don't know why I just didn't do that, because it just turned into a really bad reading experience where I just tried to get to the end of this novel, and it just felt like it was never ending. But a lot of people really love this novel, and I can definitely understand why it just wasn't for me. Then I also tried the Last Horizon Trilogy by Will Wight. The first book is called Killer Captain. It's also one of my least favorite books of the year. Unfortunately, it just seems like Will Wight, he isn't an author that works for me. I've tried 3 different novels from him, and none of them have worked. But yeah, if you think futuristic Harry Potter in space sounds fun, because this series is the definition of fun and chaos, then check out this novel. It has a very impressive star rating on Amazon. But yeah, definitely not for me. Then I read the first novel in the Demon Prince series. I think there's 5 books. The first book is called The Star King by Jack Vance. This was the novel that George R. R. Martin actually personally recommended to me, and yeah, I actually hated this novel as well. This is pulp science fiction that came out in the 60s, I believe, and there's a lot of things I didn't enjoy with this novel. Firstly, it's very, very short, so I just felt like almost none of the characters were well realized. They were extremely flat, and for some reason, Jack Vance, he loves to provide the reader with info dumps. Almost every single chapter starts with 1 to 2 to 3 pages of just info dumps, and I was just like, I had no idea what was going on. I was so confused with the series that I actually had to Google if I started with the wrong book in the series, because I was like, I have no idea what's going on. Definitely not for me, but you might love it. Then we have the Licanius Trilogy by James Islington. It's a trilogy I set out to read this year. I read the first two books, and I did have a great time with the first book, and the second book I just enjoyed, but towards the second half of the second book, I started losing interest, and when I finished the second book, I just, for some reason, had lost almost all interest in the plot and the story and the characters. But I really wanted to read and finish this trilogy this year, but I tried picking up book 3 twice now, and I cannot get further than like a chapter, and I just don't have any interest. Everything in me just screams, I don't want to read this novel, I don't want to read this novel, I don't care about the plot. It's overly complicated at this point, and even though there's a really good detailed recap at the start of the book, I just have no idea what's going on. So while I did have an overall good time with this series, I don't know what has happened, but I've lost all interest, and I don't think I'll ever complete the series. But I'm very, very interested in the Hierarchy series by James Islington, which is where the first book is called The Will of the Many. I'm definitely hoping to read that next year. Alright, only 3 more series to go. I also finished the Bone Saga, so I read The Fury of the Gods, and I thought this was a brilliant conclusion. I do still think that book 1 and 2 were better, but book 3 is an overall satisfying conclusion to an epic Nordic saga. My only nitpicks with the last book is that it was just too fast paced and just too much action. I think what really made book 2 and 1 so great is that John Gwynne, he seemed to have figured out that it's good to slow down the pacing of the plot. But with this novel, it just felt relentless, like action, action, action. But still a good conclusion, and definitely a series I would recommend to most of my readers. Then I also tried Methaga Wood by Robert Holzog, so the first book is called Methaga Wood. I think the series is called Methaga Wood as well. And this was a novel that Joe Abercrombie recommended, and this actually became one of my favorite reads of the year. I feel like haunted, mysterious forest is such an underutilized setting in fantasy, and this series has it. But yeah, if you want to know my full thoughts, I did make a video called Asking Famous Authors to Recommend Me a Book and then reading it, if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts. And the last series I've started this year, I read the first 2 books in Dungeon Crawl Carl by Matt Dinneman, and I expected to hate them, and I didn't. I gave both of these books 3 stars because I had an overall fun time with this. I think Matt is a very talented writer, and the plot is just insane. But ultimately, I don't think that this is a series for me. I didn't expect it beforehand, and as I said, I was pleasantly surprised. So I'm really glad I read it, and I feel like I understand a bit more about why people are drawn to lit RPG. So those are the 26 series I read this year. If you want to know what the best books are of 2024 according to BookTube, check out this video. Oh, you're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that I have a Viking book club on my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, then you get access to an exclusive book club where every single month we read 1 book together, and the book can be put forward by you. If you join tier 3 or 4, then you can put a book forward, and then I randomly choose a book from the pot that we end up reading together, and throughout the month we discuss the book on the Patreon chats, and then we also have Zoom hangouts, which honestly are some of my favorite times of the month. This month we're reading this book, and next month we're gonna be reading this book. Also, since I launched my Patreon, I basically spent my money back into the channel on video editing. I've had more than 40 videos professionally edited, so if you want to support what I do here and also help me upload more consistently, then I'll leave a link in the description down below.